Please welcome Kent Wada, Chief Privacy Officer and Director, Policy and Governance, University of California, Los Angeles, and panelists for Looking into a Crystal Ball, What Your Data Says About You.
Oh, there he is. Okay, I always have problems with bar stool seats here. Okay, good morning, everyone. So thrilled to be here. I can't think of a better way to be celebrating Data Privacy Day. Let me ask our two panelists to introduce themselves to get going.
Sure, I'm Karen McGee, and I lead the privacy and security legal team at Intel. Been in privacy space for, about 17 years. Hard to believe at this point, but it's gone by in a blur. Mark?
Great. Good morning. I'm Marc Groman, formerly the Senior Advisor for Privacy in the Obama White House, and also formerly the Chief Privacy Officer for the Federal Trade Commission and former CEO of the Network Advertising Initiative. And after several years of a very intense career in privacy, I'm doing my own thing for the time being, and it's truly a pleasure to be here to talk about privacy, responsibility, and trust.
Great. So we are sort of kicking off today with about 20 minutes, which is not a whole lot of time to cover a whole variety of topics. I apologize to my two panelists. I've actually changed the questions on them about 5 times already, and just during the media briefing this morning felt like I wanted to change it another 5 times. So instead, we're throwing out the questions and starting completely afresh. Coming in this morning, I saw these 2 little laptop camera cover things. Not 1, but 2, which said to me that people really do value their privacy. They pick them up. People love this. Our students love them when we offer them. Can you tell us what is in this big data marketplace? What are people collecting about us? What's in there? Who are the buyers of this data? And what are we if we're not the customer, we're the product, something like that?
Yeah, I think that's true, right? I often find myself joking with family and friends, right, about the use of free applications and, all the things that you can get free online and free on your phone. Nothing is free. You're paying for it. You're just paying for it with your data. And I think that, kind of goes to the underlying mission of many of us in the privacy space, which is to do a lot of evangelizing, whether we're starting at home with our kids, our family, or out in our business lives, right, in our jobs at work, is kind of getting those core concepts about, fundamental privacy concerns across in a way that is accessible and that people really understand. We were just chatting earlier about this era where there have been so many mega breaches at this point. People are a little shell-shocked. They're a little worn out. They sort of think, oh, well, here's another letter coming in the mail. All my information is already out there. Why should I even worry about this anymore? And it's a good question, I think, for all of us to continue to think about, because there is value in the data that is being collected about us. It's going deeper than ever before. I sort of describe it as an iceberg. There's the kind of stuff above the water that you think about, but there's a whole big terrain underneath the water that you don't necessarily see or even know is being collected that's extremely valuable. So just getting the message out, I guess, is really, really important.
So actually, maybe let me just focus the question a little bit more. We were talking a little bit this morning about some of the breaches that have happened. And of course, it's really important that people who shouldn't have access to our social security numbers and credit card data, all that stuff, shouldn't have access to that data. But that's one form of privacy, right? Thinking about making sure that another breach doesn't occur. We're also, though, talking a lot today about a different form of privacy, which is the protection from monitoring of behavior, of surveillance, Big Brother, that kind of thing. And so when we think about the value of our data, it's both in terms of prevention of breaches, but also this sort of behavioral data. What kind of behavioral data makes it so valuable that's in this vast marketplace?
Okay, and just so you know, he's serious. These really are new questions. Which is great. The first thing I want to say in response to that question is to make sure that in this context and with this audience, we are distinguishing between privacy and security, because I believe that is really important to this discussion. And so what I would say, and I have worked on well over 100 data breaches, including OPM, we want to make sure that when we think about the breaches, we're talking about security, about the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of our information, which is different than my role and function as a privacy advisor, where in general, what we're looking at is how is the information used, what are the secondary uses, is there transparency, consent, choice, and the other fair information practice principles. Security is one, but I like to distinguish between privacy and security when we talk about that. Now, your second part of your question led into this idea of behavioral advertising and research, which there goes to how is the information that is being collected used. So that is a fundamental issue around privacy. The use of our information when it's collected, whether it's online, across devices, mobile, or frankly, in the offline world as well. I'd like to suggest that in 2018, we don't have separate digital identities and offline identities. It's really all linked today. And so the behavioral data, or all data, can be now analyzed with quantum computing, new data analytics, the way we can bring data together from new sources. And we can see an extraordinary amount about individuals. We can predict a tremendous amount about individuals, our preferences, our purchase habits, what we are likely to want to buy in a few months and may not even realize, our health issues. And so the volume of data today and the quantity and the sources allow a whole new level of data analytics. And a point you made that I want to emphasize, huge benefits, and I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the tremendous benefits from data collection and data use for the free services we use to improve medicine and science. But as we do that, and what today is about is focusing on privacy, individual autonomy, transparency, respect for the individual as we seek to have these benefits.
Okay, so I actually would be an interesting discussion about just what role privacy has in those breaches. But let's think a little bit about the technologies, Michelle, we were talking about earlier, about technologies that can capture our reactions to things and emotions that contribute to this profile about us that we may not even realize.
Yeah, I think in the sort of the coming age and 2018 at Intel, there's, I would say, artificial intelligence is at the forefront of everybody's mind, right? And what does it mean? What kind of data is required for growing artificial intelligence solutions, and the importance of sensors that are used in all manner of products, even in places you wouldn't expect, right? In your clothing, in mirrors or glass when you walk into a retail establishment. We're at a point where you can have an application on your phone for a store that you like to shop at, and when you walk into that brick and mortar store, it recognizes not only that you're there, but that you're probably interested in buying a new raincoat because you were looking at one recently, on your phone. So in a billboard, up pops an ad for, a raincoat and a special discount just for you, right? And not only there, but you're likely to see the same ad for the raincoat on your home computer and your work computer and, maybe your kid's phone too, because they're creating this sort of 3D profile, as I like to call it, right? And that goes back to that point of merging your online and your offline identity. Even I think the topic of, sort of last year with the election and the sort of concept of fake news, without going too far down a political path, but right, is this idea of micro-targeting, right, based on your sort of political views and your political interests, and the impact that that's had on society. And I think Mark is right to point out there are a lot of really wonderful things that technology can do for us, and improvements, amazing improvements, right? But it's also, I think, really revealed an ability to sort of segment and separate us and isolate us in ways that we never have before because of the profiles that are being attached to us based on our our interests, right? Whether it's a nonprofit you're involved in, whether it's your church, whether it's your political affiliation. And, that's, I guess, something that we have to be aware of, too, in the information that's being collected in ways that we might not really realize.
Well, so this idea that the data about us actually is not just part of us, it is us in some sense. It's inseparable now. What our real selves, if you will, and our data about ourselves is one and the same. Certainly people make decisions based on our data when we're not there to answer questions that they might have about our credit histories, that kind of thing. Let me turn the title of this session was something about looking in the crystal ball and what the data tells, what the data says about us. Let me turn that around and ask the question for people, people who have control of our data, can add to the data with inferences and predictions, who can manipulate our data in one way or the other. Are they in fact changing us? How we're seen to the world about, do they have actually control over us in some sense that we have no control over? And we may not even be aware that's happening. Mark, maybe you could.
Well, I don't know if control over us would be the phrase I use, but the entities that have tremendous amount of data about us and analyze that data certainly influence our behaviors. They can influence, in fact, our emotions, and they can influence how we interact with the economy and the opportunities we have. I think one of the more interesting articles and stories of last year in this space was about Facebook, and I think Facebook has had many interesting stories, but in particular, this idea that Facebook can analyze posts and predict or assess whether there's a proclivity or possibility of suicide. Is somebody who is posting on Facebook, do their posts reveal an emotional problem or mental health or illness, and maybe even suicide? If Facebook has the ability through AI and machine learning to do that kind of analysis, what is their responsibility? How should they use that? I think that is a very difficult question. And Facebook, that is one example, but there are many others. There's also increasingly scoring going on by using big data and data analytics in the context of finances. Outside of our credit reporting system, where we know we have a credit report and a score where we can challenge and we have rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. But there are other entities that create scores about us, maybe based on our online experience. What have we said? Are we a risk taker? And those scores can be sold and used, and they can impact our opportunities. What products are offered to us? Maybe insurance rates going forward and other things. And so there are real issues around the collection analysis of data, how it's being used and scored. And in addition, when we talk about algorithms and artificial intelligence, big data, it's critically important that we not assume that algorithms are neutral, that computers and big data will make information or decisions that are neutral based on science, because we know that's not true. Somebody has to create the algorithm. Someone has to make decisions about what data elements go into the algorithm in order to produce the result or outcome. And therefore, there's a risk that our human biases, our concerns, we can actually bring that to AI, machine learning, and big data. And we have to be careful, and in fact, as a society, have to pay attention to that so that human biases don't find their way into artificial intelligence and other decision-making.
Yeah, I was just going to echo some of that, right? In coming back to the core question, right, which is, does the data that's collected actually, the profile, right, that's created about you then go on to actually influence your life in a meaningful way? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, it can. And the existing legal structures that we have today don't provide a lot of protections for that, right? So if a profile about you that's created because you created an online gambling account, let's say. Maybe you don't do it that often, but you thought it would be interesting, you thought it would be fun, some friend of yours recommended it, so you did it a couple of times. The fact that you created that profile actually can affect your ability to get credit, right? Can affect your ability to get a mortgage. the really convenient, watch or fitness device that many of us wear, information about your heart rate, or your pulse, or how often you're clicking that exercise ring, can go to insurance companies who may decide, what kind of insurance you're entitled to or what kind of risk comes with that. So, the fundamental question is, yes, absolutely, the data that's being collected can affect the decisions that we make, the access that we have to fundamental goods and services. And we really don't have a lot of laws in place that can meet that challenge.
So I think this goes back to this notion of, again, for those of you who were in the media briefing this morning, about this notion of transparency, of being able to understand what data is being kept on us by whom and how it's being used. And a lot of times when you're talking about these things that are happening, we're not even aware they're happening. People are making decisions about us based on data that we didn't generate or give. It's been inferred or predicted. And so, there are other cases too in sentencing. In judicial sentencing, it looks like there is software, I think Julie Angwin talks about this, which helps a judge make a decision about how, what a sentence should be. That is probably about as impactful on an individual, how long you might be in jail, as it could be. And no one actually knows what kind of data is used behind the scenes because it's a proprietary algorithm. But there are certainly many other situations like this. Are there examples that you know of that are maybe surprising to the audience about how our data is being used? Whether it's for good or for bad is irrelevant. It's just, it is.
Well, I think one of the questions you had asked earlier was who is collecting the data about us today? And I think that answer has changed really dramatically over the last decade. I think the answer now is everyone. And so whatever company you're interacting with, whether it's online, through a mobile device, an app, or brick and mortar, your information is being collected. And even when it is not their core product, so we like to talk about Google and Facebook, whose very business model relies on the data for advertising, but in so many other areas and sectors, in many cases, the information that companies have about their users and their consumers is becoming more profitable, a bigger profit center, than actually the products or services that they're selling because of the incredible insights that they're able to gather and determine out of the data sets about their customers. And so we often, I think you mentioned, we saw the Economist headline, data is the new oil. We look at the valuation of public companies and who the big players are. It's not oil companies, it's data companies. But it is really all companies today, and we need to understand that. And as in terms of unexpected uses, I think what we're looking for and want to see in the future is a lot more transparency around how information is being used. Certainly, the new laws in Europe are going to help drive that kind of transparency, because no longer will it be okay for a company to have a general statement about how they're collecting data for one or two uses, but European laws now require granularity. They want specific information about specific purposes, and they want you to get informed consent. And so hopefully that and good practices and ethics will drive more transparency. So consumers will understand that, for example, an example that I like to use, providing an email address to a website online may seem very innocuous. It's just my email, and maybe they have other information about me because of a purchase. A use that many consumers don't know is that that email address is then used to link your offline identity and purchases you've made offline at stores or through your credit card to that online identity, because they now have the email address to use to link various identities. That's one example. So it's everybody. We need more transparency and choice so that all of this technology can flourish and we can reap the benefits. I think that's what Privacy Day is about, right? It's about understanding the technology and the data, but ensuring and in fact demanding of our companies that as they move forward and innovate, they bake in best practices, even when not required by law, because as you noted, there are many gaps in US law. There are whole areas not covered by federal law. So even when there's not law, You bake in best practices, you start with privacy by design, you have ethical standards, and you tell your consumers actually what you're doing.
One thing I would just add too, it's kind of an unexpected, a couple of thoughts. An unexpected use is, this idea of sort of micro expressions and expression-based marketing, which actually has been around for a while. It sounds really novel, but if you sort of start researching it, you realize that companies have been doing this for some time, and it's very, very accurate. But using cameras and microphones that are attached to your devices, whether it's your laptop or your phone, which a lot of people then are reaching for these webcam covers, right? But buried in their terms and conditions that you just kind of click through is the right to access your camera or your microphone. And an ad pops up, and they're actually gauging from the expression on your face, your reaction to that ad. Is it positive? Is it negative? Do you, move quickly through it? What part of the advertisement are you dwelling on? Something, I wager a lot of people don't have any idea is happening when they download that free app. The other thought I had when we were talking is, and I'm curious how many people in the audience have this person in their life, right, that says, oh, I don't do social media. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on LinkedIn because I don't want anybody gathering information about me. Do you have that person, right? And I just kind of look at them and I'm like, oh, honey, right? Do you have email? Have you ever purchased anything online? Do you have a cell phone? And it comes back to the concept of, the data is not only the asset of the company, it is your asset. Right. And if you are not in charge of that information or trying to be in charge of that information, somebody will do that for you. Right. And so, I usually find myself counseling that person to think about the data that's being collected that you're not in control of, and the observations and the conclusions and the profiles that are being created about you. And, actually, you might want to create that LinkedIn account, right? You might want to be online because then at least you have a say in how your data is being used and viewed.
So let's see. If we think about informed consent seems to be like the key phrase here. Although I think anyone who's developed an app or thought about that, it's actually remarkably difficult to pin down exactly what informed consent means. And I think there's something about opacity of risk. How does an individual? We as a pretty sophisticated crowd have a little bit of difficulty figuring out, is this a risky thing to do or not? Except very generally, how does an average individual, quote unquote, average individual, make some judgment about what's risky behavior or not online? How can they actually make a decision that is informed?
Look, there's no question that in today's information age and digital ecosystem, it is increasingly challenged for any consumer to be able to make informed decisions about the kinds of information sharing they're doing online and data collection. And I think we know that. But I do think there are concrete steps that we can all take and that we should all take when we engage in the online world or mobile world in particular. And my number one that I tell to everybody, and in fact, I'm famous for doing this at dinner parties, which makes me very unpopular sometimes, is to actually understand your smartphone. And I'm often shocked how many people don't. But to actually take a look at your privacy settings on your phone, your iPhone, and to actually look at what the choices are, which is what applications can access your contacts, which in my view is one of the most sensitive things on my phone. Who are you allowing to access the camera or the photographs you've already taken? Which applications or services are accessing your location? And I am still shocked at how many people, even fairly savvy individuals, are not aware of the settings they have on their smartphones to control that about particular apps. And that is absolutely critical. And along the same lines, and especially if you are a parent, is to understand privacy settings on all services that you or your children use. What are the defaults around sharing? What is shared by default when you set up a profile? How can you use settings to limit who sees what you make available online? It is time consuming. You have no choice. Invest the time in your phone and the privacy settings. Invest the time in privacy settings on apps and services, and that will go a long way in today's information age to helping you protect your data.
I'm running out of time, but I'll add a couple of things. Number one, don't do Facebook quizzes. Like, just don't give in. don't do them. Number two, it's this time of year, I would say do some spring cleaning, right? My husband's iPhone is so full of apps that he doesn't use. It makes me crazy when I look at it. Get rid of stuff that you're not using, because that app that you haven't opened on your phone for 8 months is still collecting data about you, I guarantee it. Consider using different email accounts for different purposes, or different browsers for different purposes, right? So I have an email and a browser that I use for online shopping. I have one that I use for work. I don't contribute to the ability to easily create a 3D profile on me by sort of splitting things up that way. Also helps with spam control, actually. So those are just a few tips, I guess.
Great, and thank you. I think we've run out of time. So thank you all, and thank you, Karen and Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.